Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this instalment we get down and dirty with the creators of the Inbetweeners as we spend time at the festival.
Nick, played by Joe Thomas, is about to graduate from university when his girlfriend Caitlin, played by Hannah Toynton, dumps him. Nick's friend Shane, played by Hamid Animashawn, reminds him that they still have tickets to go to a 3-day music festival and encourages him to go so he can get out of his depressive funk. After meeting the manic Amy, played by Claudia O'Doherty, on the train there, their festival experience becomes a series of humiliating mishaps for Nick, especially as he's determined to try and win Caitlin back.
The festival comes to us from Iain Morris, who is the co-creator of the wildly popular TV series The Inbetweeners, which of course had 2 movie spin-offs, both of which were massively successful at the UK box office. They really were enormous at the time, fending off many Hollywood competitors, and in fact went on to be 2 of the most successful British movies ever made. You might recall that a few years ago we had a whole spate of TV to film adaptations, all trying to recapture the Inbetweeners' success. So if you enjoyed being tormented back in the day by the likes of Keith Lemon the film, Mrs. Brown's Boys the movie, and the Harry Hill movie, you have the Inbetweeners to thank for that. Why I order... But because those movies were so successful, Morris and Inbetweeners co-creator Damon Beasley actually set up their own production company called Fudge Park, of which this is the first film to come from them, although already they've had TV work, including Beasley's project White Gold, which airs on the BBC. But Beasley wasn't associated with this movie in any way, and Morris directs it, but he does not write it. Despite that, this is pretty much the Inbetweeners 3 in all but name, and is very much trying to recapture the success of the earlier films, and it's very obvious the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree. One of the things that's very much carried over from the Inbetweeners movies, especially the second one, which was Morris's directorial debut, is that the festival is very much built around its gross-out gags, and to some extent, given the setting, this is understandable. Music festivals are kind of disgusting. They're camping out in the mud for several days, and it's hot and it's sweaty and it's claustrophobic. As the characters state in the movie, you've just got to embrace the stink. And I think if you've been to a music festival, a lot of this will actually ring quite true. And adding to the authenticity, the filmmakers did actually shoot at Leeds Festival last year, so a lot of this movie doesn't seem like it's too exaggerated from the truth. The problem, however, is that the festival seems largely built around those 6 or 7 big set-piece moments. You know the ones that I mean, the ones that very much meant to elicit a huge reaction from a crowded audience. And normally, movies like this have a pretense of a story, but the festival has a threadbare one even by the standards of this kind of movie, so it really does seem like it's linked by the crudest moments. I do actually think there's been kind of a subtle shift somewhere. A lot of the Inbetweeners was about them finding themselves in awkward situations that sometimes would be crude, but were often about the reactions of the characters. But I think as things have progressed, I think that it very much became gross out for its own sake, and they were very much trying to top themselves. And that's particularly clear in the last movie, where I think they were really trying to push the envelope as much as they can. Like the Inbetweeners movies before this, this is a 15 certificate, but only just. They very much had to kind of trim it back from the 18 certificate they originally managed to receive, which is impressive for a movie to receive that entirely off the basis of crude humour. And it would be one thing if that was funny, but a lot of the time it kind of falls flat. I often found that the moments that really didn't work in this movie were the moments where they were trying to be as crude as possible, when really the smaller, much more observant moments were actually the ones that I laughed at. And I think that that's generally how I felt about much of the movie, in that most of the bigger moments just didn't really land for me because they were trying to force it too much. The best kind of crude humour comes out of the story, it comes out of the characters, and unfortunately, it doesn't work when that's literally the entire crux of the movie. It feels like the film is just trying to barrage these kind of situations upon you. But sometimes, and I do want to give this movie credit, it's not like I didn't laugh through it. There were actually bits that were quite amusing. The one that really stood out in my mind is a very kind of weird tangent the movie takes, roughly around the halfway point, where the characters wander off and they accidentally stumble into a druid ceremony being held just off the festival grounds. And that whole sequence is so weird and so kind of surreal and detached from everything else that I actually found that by far the most amusing segment of the movie. You kind of wish the film went a bit more off-piste like that and went, kind of in the more kind of absurdist directions that they could have gone with it. The emphasis on crude humour is starting to wear thin. The well's starting to dry up here. The feeling is particularly clear because it does seem like several of the jokes here are kind of repeated, or maybe regurgitated is the right word, from previous Inbetweeners movies. There's a bit where Nick is crawling down on the floor and he gets peed on by a random festival goer, and that becomes a very long running joke through the movie as everyone tells him that he smells of urine constantly. But all I was thinking through that initial scene was, wasn't there a big scene in the Inbetweeners 2 where the characters were trying to pee in each other's mouths? I recall that being a thing. Haven't we already done this? I mean, that's the problem with doing jokes about gross outs and bodily fluids. There's only so many of them that you can do. And there are just kind of several moments in this movie where I just got this weird sense of deja vu that I've kind of already seen this before, and I wish for a little bit more creativity. I wish that the movie kind of just had a bit more direction to it. Weirdly, the film seems to take a lot of time to really get going, which is strange when you look back upon it, because we don't take a lot of time to get to the Titch of the Music Festival. We get there maybe 20, 25 minutes in, and we're there for the whole rest of the movie for the most part. And yet, it feels like it's slow out of the starting blocks, and I think the reason that this is that there simply isn't enough story. You need more of a plot than simply the characters go to a music festival to hang your movie on. I'm not asking for tightly written storylines in a comedy, but at the same time, there needs to be a driving force, some objective to really push the characters forward. And I guess you could argue that there is one, in a sense, because Nick is trying to get back with his ex-girlfriend. You could say that that is pushing the film forward in the first half, except it's not. We don't care about them two together because they obviously aren't meant to be together. In fact, we care so little about it that I think it actually hinders the film quite considerably because of our substantial disinterest in it. We know that it's doomed to failure right from the very outset, and I totally wasn't bothered if they actually got back together or whether she would completely disown him, because really that's the thing that she should be doing. And it's only around halfway through does the film finally start to find its own footing as it moves in a totally different direction. At the midway point, Nick has a wild night with a character known only as Smurf Girl, played by Emma Rigby, who was separated from her hen party. That's a bachelorette party for your Americans out there. And Nick wakes up the following morning. She's gone, he barely remembers what happened the night before, and so he spends the rest of the movie trying to piece together what happened that night and work out who she is and where she is. And I know what you're thinking at this point. Isn't that blatantly a Hangover ripoff? Isn't that very late, considering that was 9 years ago now? Yes, but you know what? I will take that, I think, because this gives the movie an engine. It gives it a sense of drive that it simply wasn't having before. It just meandered along. Now we actually have a kind of structure to actually place all these kind of gross out scenes upon. And I found myself much more interested in the movie from this point onwards than I was before. And it does help that some of the better material actually comes in the second half rather than the first half. Particularly one sequence where Nick is imagining his future with Smurf Girl in a dream sequence, which is just ridiculous. It goes into the realms of absolute absurdity, and that's what I mean. When the movie has these kind of very unusual digressions, that's when it works best. This dream sequence kind of goes on for so long that it actually swings back round to being utterly hysterical again. It just exaggerates and exaggerates and exaggerates, and it's a really fantastic standout moment in a movie which is otherwise fairly patchy. But the film does strike occasional moments of genuine comic brilliance. Another element that makes us feel a lot like the Inbetweeners is the casting of Joe Thomas in the lead role. He played Simon in the TV show. In this movie, he's pretty much playing the same character in all but name. Right down to the fact that at the beginning of this movie, he gets dumped by his girlfriend, played by Hannah Toynton, who is his real-life fiancée, so he ends up in a depressive funk that's only broken when his best friend Shane invites him to go to a music festival, or to go on holiday, which was the setup for the first Inbetweeners movie. So right from the very outset, you feel like this is a rehash. This feels very, very familiar. There's a sense of deja vu all over this movie. And separated from the rest of the Inbetweeners gang, it's clear that Thomas is the least interesting out of all of them, especially because, based on this evidence, he's not got a loss of range. He's once again playing the same self-pitying, stick in the mud that gets obsessed with women. And in this movie, I know he's meant to be annoying and obnoxious to the point where even the characters look upon his exploits and go, oh, that's such a Nick thing to do. But even the audience can sympathise with them because he's quite hard to like. I actually found that to be another impediment to getting fully invested in the film. I really struggled with him a lot of the time, especially after an early scene where he turns his graduation into a very embarrassing, very public attempt to try and win his girlfriend back that backfires in the most tremendous way. And that scene goes on and on and on, and it really is not funny. It did not land with me at all. In fact, what it really did was it reminded me of I Love You, Beth Cooper. Do not remind me of I Love You, Beth Cooper. I did start to warm towards him a little bit over the course of the film, especially because some of this is meant to be intentional. That's meant to be the character's arc, that he realises just how much of an obnoxious tit he is. It doesn't completely absolve it, but I think what really kind of made me soften a little bit is that at least Thomas is very game for a joke. He takes everything that this movie throws at him in his stride. I'm not sure that I would have the courage to run around a music festival in my underwear, but Thomas gamely acquits himself here, so I guess that's the reason that he's the lead in this movie. He's perfectly willing to subject himself to this and is a glutton for punishment. I spent a lot of this movie wishing it spent more time on its supporting cast because they were far more interesting, especially Shane, played by Hamed Sean, and he's a really great discovery. He shows a natural comic flair and charisma that I think outshines Thomas in certain scenes, especially the stripping scene. Sean really throws himself into that bit, and a lot of the film's big laughs come from him, and he's lovably endearing, and honestly, he should have been the main character, because he wants to go and see the mysterious DJ Hammerhead. No one knows what he looks like. That should have been the propulsive force behind the movie. Instead, he's pretty much playing second fiddle to a far less engaging character. Speaking of really lovably endearing characters, I grew to like Amy, played by Claudia O'Doherty, and I wasn't sure if that was going to be the case when she first entered, because she could have been that character that would have been really obnoxious and grating, and she is to a certain extent, but she's got this kind of dossy, happy-go-lucky vibe. She's an Australian character that tags along with them, and I grew to like her with her strange stories and the fact that she's foisting upon this unusual family recipe to people that goes exactly how you think it would, but nevertheless, that character is a little bundle of just strangeness at the centre of this movie. She's another one of the film's most surreal elements. She's probably the most cartoonish character in the movie, but she worked for me, and I really, again, found that she stole scenes from Joe Thomas. There's a fair few cameos from some recognisable faces, but they're often only for a scene or two. For example, Nick Frost very briefly plays a tattoo artist, but the one that very much stuck out in my mind is Jemaine Clement. He plays Shane's stepdad, who's very much trying to be a good father, and he's very over-emotional, and he has some kind of horrifying festival stories himself, particularly one about penile amputation, and Clement takes his minimal screen time. He's maybe only in this movie for about 5 minutes tops, and runs with it, and as such, he's very much a standout element. I really laughed whenever he was on screen, and I wish he was in this movie longer. I don't think this movie makes enough use of Jemaine Clement, but I was thankful that he was there to begin with, because even a little bit of Clement is a very good thing. The festival is very much a mixed bag. I'd be lying if I said I didn't laugh at some of it, but I was also aware of just how much didn't land here, and I think this is a case of too many gross outs, too little story, and Morris would be best served doing something different in the future rather than trying to chase the success of the Inbetweeners, because at this point it's pretty obviously diminishing returns and he's already repeating himself. As it stands though, it's perfectly fine. It's something that you'll likely stumble onto on TV, and that looks like its natural home, and I think that it's passable but not especially memorable, and I think that if you really want an exciting experience, you should probably actually go to a real-life music festival.
The festival very much carries over the formula from the Inbetweeners movies, to the point where it could almost be considered an unofficial sequel, given how Joe Thomas is more or less playing the same character. The story is largely there to forward the characters from one crude set piece to the next, but the approach is starting to wear thin, and the film actually fares better away from where it's trying to force a gross-out gag for the sake of shock value than it is humour. The loose structure also makes it clear how episodic it is, and it's only in the second half where it starts to show more purpose, and Thomas makes her a rather irritating main character no matter how game he is for what humiliation is served up next. The festival isn't without some laughs, especially from Jemaine Clement's small part, but it definitely isn't a headliner.
If you like this review, then you can get some backstage passes over at my Patreon, where you can see my reviews early among other perks, including access to my Discord server. But until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.
This is the best night of my life!